Have you ever noticed how the harder you try to say no without feeling guilty, the more elusive that sense of peace becomes? There's a reason for this, and once you see it, everything shifts. Let me show you what I mean. What if the secret to saying no without guilt has nothing to do with finding the right words or building thicker skin, and everything to do with something much more profound? By the end of our time together, you'll see why this understanding transforms not just your ability to set boundaries, but who you become in your relationships and in your own life. The people who effortlessly say no without drowning in guilt know something that the rest of us are missing. It's not what you think, and it's definitely not what they teach in assertiveness training. They've discovered that guilt isn't the enemy of healthy boundaries, it's often a compass pointing toward what needs to heal. Stay with me because this changes everything about how you approach relationships, self-worth, and the art of honoring your own needs. The guilt prison. Have you noticed how saying no can feel like committing a crime against someone you care about? There's something happening beneath the surface that most of us miss because we're focused on finding the perfect words, the right timing, or the magical technique that will let us decline requests without that crushing wave of guilt that follows. Picture this scenario that plays out in countless lives every day. A colleague asks you to take on an extra project when you're already overwhelmed. Your friend wants you to attend yet another social event when you desperately need rest. Your family member requests a favor that would require sacrificing something important to you. You know you should say no. Your rational mind is clear about this. But as you open your mouth to decline, something happens. The guilt hits like a physical weight. You imagine their disappointment, their judgment, their potential rejection. You start questioning yourself. Maybe you're being selfish. Maybe you should just suck it up and help. Maybe saying no makes you a bad person, a bad friend, a bad family member. So you say yes, again, even though every cell in your body was screaming no. You help, you attend, you sacrifice, and you feel resentful afterward, not just toward them, but toward yourself for being unable to honor your own boundaries. This cycle repeats until you're living a life shaped more by other people's needs and expectations and by your own authentic desires and limitations. You're exhausted, overcommitted, and secretly angry at everyone for making you do things you don't want to do, even though you know, rationally, that you're the one saying yes. I understand this struggle intimately because it's one of the most common human experiences. That internal battle between wanting to be a good person and needing to protect your energy, time, and well-being. The confusion about whether having boundaries makes you selfish or whether constantly sacrificing yourself makes you noble. The fear of saying no will damage relationships, coupled with the growing resentment that comes from saying yes too often. Here's what we've been missing about guilt and boundaries. Guilt isn't random. It's not just an inconvenient emotion that gets in the way of healthy choices. Guilt often stems from deep, unconscious beliefs about our worth, our role in relationships, and what it means to be a good person. These beliefs were often formed early in life, and they're running the show without our conscious awareness. Think of guilt like a smoke alarm that's been programmed with faulty settings. A properly functioning smoke alarm alerts you to real danger, actual fire that threatens your safety. But when the settings are wrong, it goes off when you burn toast, when steam comes from the shower, when there's no real threat at all. Your guilt response may be alerting you to threats that don't actually exist, threats to relationships that are actually healthy enough to handle your boundaries, threats to your identity as a good person that are based on unrealistic standards. The breakthrough comes when you understand that learning to say no without guilt isn't about suppressing the guilt or finding better techniques for declining requests. It's about examining and healing the underlying beliefs that create the guilt in the first place. When those beliefs shift, saying no naturally becomes easier, not because you've become harder or more selfish, but because you've developed a healthier understanding of love, relationships, and your own worth. What if your struggle with guilt has been trying to teach you something essential about how you've been conditioned to see yourself and your relationships? What if the path to guilt-free boundaries runs through understanding and compassion rather than force and technique? The wisdom of authentic boundaries. Let me tell you about Maria, a therapist who spent years unable to say no to anyone. Colleagues constantly asked her to cover extra sessions. Friends assumed she was always available for crisis support, and her family treated her like an emotional dumping ground. Maria believed that her inability to say no made her compassionate and loving. She saw her constant availability as evidence of her caring nature. But Maria was burning out. She was exhausted, resentful, and starting to lose her effectiveness in her professional work because she was so emotionally drained from constantly saying yes to everyone else's needs. The guilt she felt when she even considered saying no was overwhelming. She believed that good therapists, good friends, and good daughters never put their own needs first. Everything changed when Maria's own therapist asked her a simple question. If you're so drained that you can't show up fully for anyone, including yourself, how is that actually serving the people you love? This question cracked open something Maria had never considered. Her constant yes-saying wasn't actually coming from love. It was coming from fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of being seen as selfish. Fear that she was only valuable if she was useful. Maria began to experiment with small boundaries. Instead of immediately saying yes to every request, she started saying, "Let me check my schedule and get back to you." This simple pause gave her space to actually consider whether she had the capacity to help without depleting herself. To her surprise, most people were completely understanding when she occasionally said no. More importantly, Maria discovered that when she said yes from a place of genuine availability rather than guilt-driven obligation, her help was more valuable. She was more present, more effective, and more genuinely caring because she wasn't resentful or exhausted. This reveals something profound about human relationships. Authentic boundaries don't damage healthy relationships, they strengthen them. People who truly care about you want you to be honest about your limits rather than burning yourself out trying to please them. And relationships that can't handle your boundaries often aren't as healthy as they appear. Here's what transforms everything about saying no. Boundaries aren't walls that keep people out. They're the foundation that makes genuine intimacy and support possible. When you know where you end and others begin, when you can say no to what doesn't serve you, you create space to say yes wholeheartedly to what does. While most people try to eliminate guilt through willpower or better communication techniques, true freedom comes from understanding that healthy guilt serves a purpose. It alerts you when you're acting out of alignment with your values. But unhealthy guilt, the kind that keeps you trapped in people-pleasing patterns, comes from distorted beliefs about your worth and your responsibilities to others. Like a garden that needs fences to protect it from being trampled, your energy, time, and emotional well-being need boundaries to remain healthy and sustainable. These boundaries don't make you less loving, they make your love more sustainable and authentic. When you can give from choice rather than obligation, from abundance rather than depletion, your contributions to others' lives become infinitely more valuable. When you learn to distinguish between healthy guilt that guides you toward integrity and unhealthy guilt that keeps you trapped in unsustainable patterns, saying no transforms from an act of selfishness into an act of wisdom and love. Love for yourself and ultimately love for others who benefit from your authentic, boundaried presence. The 4 foundations. The journey from guilt-ridden people-pleasing to confident, compassionate boundary setting isn't built through assertiveness techniques alone. It emerges through understanding and healing the deeper foundations that create sustainable change from the inside out. Foundation 1. Self-worth healing. Most boundary struggles stem from fundamental questions about worth and belonging. If you unconsciously believe that your value comes from your usefulness to others, saying no feels like risking your entire identity and place in relationships. This isn't conscious, it's a deep programming that often begins in childhood. Self-worth healing means examining the beliefs you hold about what makes you valuable as a person. Do you believe you have to earn love through constant giving? Do you feel responsible for other people's emotions? Do you equate having needs with being selfish? These beliefs create the fertile ground where unhealthy guilt grows. The healing process begins with developing what I call inherent worth awareness, the recognition that your value as a person exists independent of what you do for others. This isn't a mental concept you think your way into. It's an embodied knowing that develops through consistent practice of honoring your own needs and boundaries. Start by noticing the internal dialogue that happens when you consider saying no. What fears come up? What beliefs about yourself or relationships get triggered? Often, you'll discover that saying no feels dangerous, not because of any real threat, but because of unconscious associations you've made between boundaries and abandonment, or between self-care and selfishness. Practice small acts of self-honoring that have nothing to do with other people. Take time for activities you enjoy without needing to justify them. Express preferences about small things, what you want to eat, which movie to watch, how you want to spend your weekend. These micro practices build evidence for your unconscious mind that you matter and your preferences are valid. Self-worth healing also involves developing a more mature understanding of love in relationships. Healthy relationships are based on mutual respect and authentic connection, not on one person constantly sacrificing for the other. When you believe this intellectually and feel it emotionally, saying no stops feeling like a threat to love and starts feeling like an expression of it. The goal isn't to become selfish or uncaring. It's to develop such a solid sense of your own value that you can give generously from choice rather than desperation, from abundance rather than the fear that saying no will make you unlovable. Foundation 2, emotional sovereignty. Many people struggle with boundaries because they've unconsciously taken responsibility for other people's emotions. They believe that if someone feels disappointed by their no, they've done something wrong. This emotional enmeshment makes saying no feel cruel because you're trying to manage not just your own feelings, but everyone else's too. Emotional sovereignty means understanding that you are responsible for your own emotions and other people are responsible for theirs. This doesn't mean you become callous or indifferent to others' feelings. It means you recognize that other people's emotional reactions belong to them, not to you. When someone feels disappointed because you can't help them, that disappointment is information about their situation and their attachment to your assistance. It's not necessarily information about whether you should change your boundary. Mature, emotionally healthy people understand that others have limits and that disappointment is a normal part of life that they can handle. Developing emotional sovereignty requires learning to tolerate other people's difficult emotions without automatically trying to fix them or taking responsibility for causing them. This is challenging because many of us learned early that we were somehow responsible for keeping the important people in our lives happy. Practice sitting with others' disappointment without immediately rushing to make it better. Notice the urge to over-explain, to apologize excessively, or to change your boundary when someone seems upset. Instead, offer empathy without taking responsibility. I can see you're disappointed. That makes sense given what you were hoping for. This foundation also involves developing your own emotional regulation skills. When guilt arises after saying no, instead of either suppressing it or being overwhelmed by it, you learn to be present with the feeling while maintaining your boundary. You might think, I notice guilt coming up. That's understandable given my history, and I'm going to stick with my decision because it's what I need right now. Emotional sovereignty creates space for authentic relationships where both people can have their feelings without those feelings controlling the other person's choices. This is actually much more intimate and respectful than constantly trying to manage each other's emotional states. Foundation 3, values clarity. One reason saying no feels so difficult is that many people aren't clear about their own values and priorities. Without this clarity, every request feels equally important, and it's hard to know when saying yes serves you and when it doesn't. Values clarity means developing a clear understanding of what matters most to you in life. Not what you think should matter, not what others expect to matter to you, but what actually resonates with your authentic self. These values become the filter through which you evaluate requests and opportunities. When someone asks you to do something, instead of automatically feeling guilty for wanting to say no, you can check the request against your values. Does this align with what's important to me right now? Does saying yes to this mean saying no to something that matters more? Am I saying yes from an authentic desire to help or from guilt and obligation? This doesn't mean you become rigidly selfish or never help others. It means your helping becomes more intentional and sustainable because it's aligned with your genuine priorities rather than driven by guilt or people-pleasing patterns. Values clarity also helps you communicate your boundaries more effectively. Instead of making excuses or over-explaining, you can simply say, "That doesn't work with my current priorities," or "I'm not available for that right now." When you're clear about your values, your boundaries feel less personal and more like practical decisions. The process of clarifying values often reveals how much of your life has been shaped by what you thought you should value rather than what you actually value. This recognition can be initially uncomfortable but ultimately liberating as you begin to make choices that truly reflect who you are. Spend time regularly checking in with yourself about what's most important to you in this season of life. Values can shift over time, and what mattered deeply 5 years ago might not be your priority now. Staying current with your authentic values makes boundary decisions much clearer and easier to maintain. Foundation 4: Communication Mastery. The final foundation involves developing the skills to communicate boundaries in ways that are clear, kind, and firm. This isn't about finding magical words that eliminate all guilt or ensure that everyone is happy with your decisions. It's about expressing your boundaries in ways that honor both your needs and your relationships. Effective boundary communication is typically simple and direct. The urge to over-explain often comes from guilt and the hope that if you provide enough reasons, the other person won't be disappointed. But excessive explanation can actually undermine your boundary by suggesting that it's negotiable if they can just address your concerns. Instead of saying, "I'm so sorry, I really wish I could help, but I've been so busy lately and I'm feeling overwhelmed and I have this other commitment and I feel terrible about letting you down," try, "I won't be able to help with that, but I hope you find the good solution." Communication mastery also involves learning to tolerate the discomfort of other people's reactions without immediately trying to fix or manage them. When someone pushes back against your boundary, responds with disappointment, or tries to guilt you into changing your mind, you can acknowledge their feelings without changing your decision. This foundation includes developing skills for different types of boundary conversations. Sometimes you need to set boundaries proactively. I want to let you know that I won't be available for evening calls during weekdays. Sometimes you need to respond to specific requests. That doesn't work for me. Sometimes you need to address ongoing patterns. I've noticed I've been saying yes to things I don't really have capacity for, so I'm going to be more careful about my commitments. The goal isn't to become a boundary-setting machine who never considers others' needs. It's to develop the communication skills that allow you to honor your own needs while remaining connected and caring in your relationships. When boundaries are communicated with clarity and kindness, they often strengthen relationships rather than damaging them. The physiology of guilt. Understanding how to say no without guilt requires recognizing that guilt isn't just a mental or emotional experience. It's a full-body physiological response that can feel overwhelming and dangerous, even when the actual threat is minimal. When guilt arises, your nervous system often interprets it as a threat to social connection, which our brains are wired to perceive as a survival issue. This is why saying no can trigger such intense physical sensations: racing heart, tight chest, churning stomach, or overall tension. Your body is responding as if your life depends on maintaining connection, even when the request is relatively minor. Learning to work with this physiological response rather than being controlled by it is crucial for developing sustainable boundaries. This means developing what trauma therapists call nervous system regulation, the ability to stay grounded and present even when difficult emotions arise. Simple practices can help regulate your nervous system when guilt arises. Deep, slow breathing activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which helps counteract the fight-or-flight response that guilt often triggers. Grounding techniques, feeling your feet on the floor, noticing physical sensations, or naming things you can see around you, help you stay present, rather than getting lost in catastrophic thinking about what might happen if you say no. Understanding the physiology of guilt also helps you recognize that the intensity of the feeling doesn't necessarily correspond to the actual importance of the situation. Your body might respond to declining a casual social invitation with the same intensity it would respond to a genuine threat to your safety. This recognition helps you make decisions based on actual circumstances rather than the intensity of your emotional reaction. Over time, as you practice saying no and discover that the feared consequences rarely materialize, your nervous system begins to recalibrate. The physiological response to setting boundaries becomes less intense because your body learns from experience that boundaries are safe, not dangerous. This doesn't mean you stop caring about others or become insensitive to their needs. It means you develop the capacity to care for others while also caring for yourself, to consider their feelings while not being controlled by them. The relationship transformation. One of the most surprising discoveries people make when they learn to say no without guilt is how it transforms their relationships, often in ways that are much more positive than they expected. Many people avoid setting boundaries because they fear it will damage their relationships. They imagine that saying no will lead to conflict, disappointment, or even abandonment. While it's true that some relationships may change when you start honoring your boundaries, the changes often reveal important information about the health and sustainability of those connections. Healthy relationships actually improve when both people have clear boundaries. When you can say no to what doesn't work for you, your yes becomes more meaningful. People learn to value your time and energy because they know it's not unlimited. They begin to ask for your help more thoughtfully because they know you won't automatically say yes out of guilt. There's no underlying resentment because you genuinely want to be there. This authenticity is felt by others and makes your support more valuable and meaningful. Some relationships may struggle when you start setting boundaries, and this information is actually valuable. Relationships that were built on your inability to say no may need to be renegotiated or may naturally fade. This can be painful, but it also creates space for connections that honor your full humanity, including your needs and limits. People who truly care about your well-being will support your boundaries even when they're occasionally disappointed by them. They understand that sustainable relationships require both people to be honest about their capacities and limitations. The relationship transformation also extends to your relationship with yourself. When you consistently honor your own boundaries, you develop greater self-trust and self-respect. You begin to see yourself as someone worthy of care and consideration, not just from others, but from yourself. This internal shift then influences all your external relationships. You attract people who appreciate authenticity and mutual respect. You naturally gravitate toward connections that feel supportive rather than draining. You become someone who can offer genuine love and support because you're no longer depleted from giving more than you actually have to give. Cultural and family patterns. Many boundary struggles are rooted in cultural, family, or religious patterns that were established long before you had conscious choice about them. Understanding these influences can help you distinguish between values that truly serve you and conditioning that may be keeping you trapped in unhealthy patterns. Some cultures strongly emphasize collective harmony over individual needs, teaching that putting your own needs first is selfish or even shameful. While there's wisdom in considering the collective good, problems arise when this teaching is so extreme that individuals lose touch with their own legitimate needs and boundaries. Family systems often have spoken or unspoken rules about boundaries. Some families teach that love means complete availability, and that saying no to family requests is a betrayal. Others may have patterns where one person, often a woman, is expected to be the caretaker who never has needs of her own. Religious or spiritual traditions sometimes promote self-sacrifice as the highest virtue, teaching that good people always put others first. While service and generosity are beautiful qualities, problems arise when these teachings are interpreted in ways that eliminate self-care and boundary setting as valid spiritual practices. Examining these patterns doesn't mean rejecting your culture, family, or religious tradition. It means developing the discernment to distinguish between teachings that promote healthy relationship and teachings that enable dysfunction or abuse. You might discover that what you thought were moral imperatives, always say yes, never disappoint others, put everyone else's needs first, are actually cultural conditioning that doesn't serve your highest good or the good of your relationships. This examination often reveals that truly loving, healthy cultures, families, and spiritual communities actually support individual boundaries as necessary for sustainable community. The healthiest groups understand that members who are honest about their limits can contribute more effectively than members who are depleted from overgiving. As you develop clearer boundaries, you may need to have conversations with family members or community members who are used to your unlimited availability. These conversations can be challenging, but often lead to more honest, sustainable relationships where everyone's needs are considered. The practice of self-advocacy ultimately requires developing what I call self-advocacy, the skill of standing up for your own needs, preferences, and limitations with the same care and attention you'd give to someone you love.
Self-advocacy means becoming curious about your own experience, rather than immediately dismissing or minimizing it. When you feel tired, instead of pushing through, you might ask, what does this tiredness need? When you feel resistant to a request, instead of automatically overriding the resistance, you might wonder, what is this resistance trying to tell me? This practice requires developing a more compassionate internal dialogue. Many people speak to themselves more harshly than they would ever speak to a friend. They criticize themselves for having needs, shame themselves for wanting boundaries, and dismiss their own feelings as unimportant or selfish. Self-advocacy involves learning to speak to yourself with the same kindness and understanding you'd offer someone you care about. When guilt arises after saying no, instead of beating yourself up, you might think, of course this feels challenging. I'm learning a new skill, and change is always uncomfortable at first. The practice also includes advocating for yourself in real time during conversations. This might mean taking a pause when someone makes a request instead of immediately responding. It might mean saying, let me think about that and get back to you, when you need time to consider your capacity. Self-advocacy sometimes requires educating others about your boundaries and why they matter. This isn't about convincing them to approve of your choices, but about helping them understand your perspective so they can adjust their expectations accordingly. As you develop stronger self-advocacy skills, you begin to trust yourself more deeply. You know that you can handle whatever reactions arise when you set boundaries. You develop confidence that you can take care of yourself while still maintaining caring relationships with others. This trust becomes the foundation for increasingly authentic and satisfying relationships, because people know they're getting the real you, someone who can say both yes and no honestly, someone whose presence is genuine because it's chosen rather than obligated.
You begin to trust that healthy relationships can handle your boundaries, and relationships that can't handle them provide valuable information about their sustainability. You develop the ability to disappoint others occasionally without seeing it as a failure of love or character. Most importantly, you discover that learning to say no without guilt wasn't really about saying no at all. It was about developing such a clear sense of your own worth, values, and capacity that your choices naturally become more aligned with your authentic self. When you can say no with clarity and compassion, your yes becomes infinitely more meaningful. People learn to value your time and presence because they know it's genuine, not given from guilt or obligation. Your relationships become more honest, sustainable, and mutually respectful. The transformation extends beyond specific boundary situations to your entire sense of personal agency and self-respect. You become someone who can be trusted with your own life, someone who makes choices based on wisdom rather than fear, someone who can love others generously because you've learned to love yourself wisely. This is the true freedom that lies beyond guilt. Not the freedom from caring about others, but the freedom to care for others from a place of genuine choice and sustainable abundance. When you can honor your own needs without guilt, you create space to honor others' needs authentically, and this creates the foundation for relationships that truly serve everyone involved. The journey requires patience, self-compassion, and consistent practice. But the destination, becoming someone who can say both yes and no from authentic choice rather than guilt or obligation, transforms not just your relationships, but your entire experience of what it means to live with integrity and love.